Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. It was a gloomy, rainy Monday, one of those days when every minute seemed endless. I was slouched in my cramped, dimly lit office, absent-mindedly playing solitaire on my laptop, losing game after game. Suddenly, the door creaked unexpectedly, and a woman entered. She appeared to be around 50, with obviously dyed dark hair. She stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed, I guessed, no more than 120 pounds. Too thin for my taste, but she carried herself with elegance. Her designer bag and sparkling diamond earrings clearly hinted at wealth. "Are you Detective Thomas Brown?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. "That's me. And who might you be?" I replied, leaning back in my chair, trying to appear relaxed. She approached my cluttered desk with polished grace and extended her hand. "My name is Abigail Miller." I stood up, shook her hand, and gestured to the chair opposite. "Please take a seat, Mrs. Miller." She sat down gracefully and immediately corrected me. "I'm Mrs., not Miss. I'm still married, for now at least. I think my husband is cheating on me and I need you to confirm it. You do that kind of work, right? Photos and all?" I sighed quietly. This was the part of the job I hated. After 15 years of dealing with real criminals, a bullet to the knee had ended my police career. Now I was a private investigator, spending my days on stakeouts outside cheap motels, photographing unfaithful spouses. It wasn't the work I had dreamed of, but it paid the bills. "Yes, I do that kind of work," I replied evenly. "Tell me what you know." She hesitated for a moment before starting. "Oscar and I have been married for 27 years. He's a vice president at a large company. I think he's seeing one of his colleagues. I suspect they meet at one of the fancy hotels downtown, close to his office." I began jotting notes in my notepad. "What makes you think he's seeing someone? Do you have any evidence?" "Not exactly," she admitted, her voice softening. "It's more of a feeling. He's become distant, acting differently. We barely touch each other anymore, which is unusual for him." She paused, lowering her gaze to her hands, then continued. "A month ago, I found a receipt in his shirt pocket from a jewelry store for an expensive bracelet, but he never gave it to me. That's when I started checking his credit card statements. Over the last 3 weeks, I saw charges for hotel stays. He always comes home by evening, so why does he need a hotel room? His company covers client meetings, so it can't be work-related." "You think he's meeting someone in the middle of the day, on Wednesdays?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "And you want proof? Photos?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "We have a prenuptial agreement. If I can prove he's cheating, I'll destroy him. He won't get a cent." "Understood," I said, putting down my pen. "I'll follow him this Wednesday and find out what's going on. If he's with another woman, you'll have the proof." She smiled with satisfaction and stood up. I stood as well. The meeting was over. "I brought $2,000 in cash to start," she said, placing the money on my desk. "Is that enough?" "That'll do," I responded, watching her neatly arrange the bills. "I'll contact you on Thursday with a preliminary report," I added. With that, she turned and left the office, her hips swaying in a deliberately dramatic manner. As the door closed behind her, I suddenly caught myself wondering, did she notice the wedding ring on my finger? Or did she not care? Perhaps she was already envisioning her future, picturing a life after divorce. Who could have seen this coming? That Wednesday, I entered the most expensive hotel precisely at 12:30 p.m. It was the closest hotel to the office where her husband worked, and with the constant rain outside, proximity mattered. I discreetly handed a $100 bill to the receptionist and inquired about the room my brother, Oscar Miller, had booked. She gave me a long, suspicious look before glancing at the money. With a reluctant sigh, she reached for the notepad. After scribbling room 601, she tore off the page and silently handed it to me. I nodded in thanks and made my way to the free coffee station in the lobby. Glancing at the photograph Mrs. Miller had given me while sipping the barely warm coffee, I took up a position where I had a clear view of the elevators. At 1 p.m., Oscar Miller strode confidently into the lobby and headed toward the elevators, His movements suggested that his girlfriend had probably already received the room key and was waiting for him upstairs. I watched as the elevator doors closed behind him and checked the display to confirm he went to the 5th floor. After waiting 5 minutes, I gathered my belongings into a small duffel bag and took the elevator up to the 6th floor. From there, I quietly slipped into the stairwell and descended 1 floor. Carefully cracking open the door to the 5th floor, I scanned the hallway. It was empty. Perfect. I approached room 601. Pressing my ear to the door, I could hear muffled voices inside. I reached into my bag for the snake camera, but the gap under the door was too narrow. Cursing under my breath, I pulled out a crowbar and gently pried the door up. With the door slightly raised, I was able to slide the camera underneath. The screen flickered to life, and the autofocus began adjusting. After a few moments, the bed came into view. My eyes froze on Oscar Miller's face. As I recorded the scene, I shifted the camera slightly to capture the woman next to him. A wave of nausea hit me. I nearly dropped the equipment when I saw her, the unmistakable bird tattoo on her shoulder. My heart clenched. There was no mistake. How could she do this? For almost 25 years, my brother had loved this woman. Her betrayal struck me like a knife, driven deep into my gut. I felt the nausea rising again, but I forced myself to swallow it down, focusing on my breathing. She was nothing more than a lying traitor. I steeled myself, reminding myself I had a job to finish. Abigail Miller needed irrefutable evidence to annul the marriage contract, and I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. Clenching my teeth, I continued observing. The woman with long dark hair moved in a way that left no doubt. Every look at her face confirmed the painful truth, tearing apart the last remnants of my resolve. Part of me wanted to burst in, shatter the illusion, and put an end to the agony tearing me apart inside, but instead I packed the camera away and slipped it back into my bag. Leaning against the stairwell door, I felt a wave of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, wash over me. The emotions, rage, sadness, disgust, were unbearable. Questions flooded my mind, questions without answers. Why did she do it? How long had it been going on? Shaking my head, I tried to push those thoughts away. I needed to stay professional and finish the job. Abigail Miller was counting on this evidence, and I couldn't fail her. 10 minutes later, Oscar Miller exited room 601 with a smug grin on his face. He adjusted his tie, glanced around, and headed for the elevator. Once he was gone, I hurried to the door. For a moment I considered knocking, but instead leaned against the wall across from the room. A few minutes later, the door opened, and there she was. As soon as she saw me, her eyes widened in shock, and she slammed the door shut. I knocked firmly but calmly, my voice commanding, "Patricia, open the damn door." After a brief moment of uncertainty, she cautiously turned the handle and opened the door. Her face was streaked with tears. "Thomas. Oh God, Thomas, why are you here?" "The real question is, why are you here?" My voice cut through the air, cold and merciless. "Thomas, it's not what you think. I can explain everything," she pleaded, her voice trembling and filled with desperation. "It was just enough," I interrupted sharply. "I'm tired of listening to your lying excuses, Patricia." Patricia's legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor. Her body shook with sobs as she hugged herself and rocked back and forth in despair. "Oh God, Thomas, does he know? Did he send you?" Her voice became a barely audible, panicked whisper. "No, no, oh God." Thomas stood over her, his expression hard, showing not a trace of sympathy. He had no pity left for her. He had seen the footage. No matter what she was about to say, the truth was clear. There was no coercion, no pressure. She had been more than willing. "Patricia," he said coldly, "David didn't send me. Oscar's wife hired me. She suspected something and came to me. I found the evidence. I didn't expect to find you involved in this." Patricia's sobs grew louder. "Oh God, what are you going to do? Please, Thomas, you can't tell David. It will destroy him. Please don't." Thomas's voice softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "Patricia, I care about you. You were like a sister to me. When you married my brother, I welcomed you into our family with open arms. You've been a part of our lives for nearly 25 years. You're the godmother of my children. How could you risk all of that for someone like Miller? Thomas, no, please. You don't have to tell him. I'm begging you. He shook his head. No, Patricia, I won't say anything. But you will. You'll tell David everything by the end of the weekend. If you don't, I'll show him the video myself. You have until Monday. Her eyes widened in horror. She gasped, her face pale. Please, Thomas, don't let him see it. I swear I'll tell him everything. Just don't let him see me with Miller. Thomas extended his hand to help her up and gently directed her toward her car. Go home, he said. End the day. Wait for David and tell him everything. Still trembling, she nodded and promised to confess to his brother. Thomas gave her his word in return. If she came clean, David would never see the video. Later in his office, Thomas sat down to review the evidence he had collected for Abigail Miller, Oscar's wife. Using software he had bought, he blurred Patricia's face in the footage. Abigail only needed proof of her husband's infidelity to activate the prenuptial agreement. Knowing the identity of the mistress wasn't necessary. On Sunday evening, Thomas's phone buzzed with a message from David. It was brief. Can we talk? Without hesitation, Thomas called him. Hey, brother, what's going on? Hey, Oscar, David replied. I wanted to ask if I can stay with you for a few days. Of course, Thomas said, feeling a wave of unease. What's happening? Patricia confessed that she had a brief affair, David admitted quietly. She says it's over and swears it won't happen again. It's hard, really hard to trust her again. I want to, but deep down, I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive her. David, you know how much you and Patricia mean to me, Thomas said. No matter what you decide, I'll stand by you. I appreciate that, Thomas, David replied, his voice filled with uncertainty. But tell me, what would you do if this happened with Lily? Thomas sighed, pausing before he answered. David, I hope I never find myself in that situation. I love Lily more than anything in the world, just like you love Patricia. But if Lily ever betrayed me, I don't know how I would react. David nodded, lost in thought. Yes, I still have feelings for Patricia, and I think she feels the same. But I'm stuck, brother. I don't know what to do. As your older brother, Thomas said gently, I can't tell you what's right. It's something you have to decide for yourself, for your future. David exhaled heavily. Thanks, brother. I promised Patricia we'd talk it through tonight. Let me know if you need me to stop by, Thomas said. But the night passed without a call. It seemed that David and Patricia had decided to give it another try. I couldn't blame him for the choice. It was his life, and only he could decide what was right. Looking back, I'm almost certain I would have acted differently, but it's easy to say that when you're not living through it. Later that night, as I lay in bed with Lily, my thoughts began to wander. Lily, I asked, are you truly happy with the life we've built together? She looked at me, her eyes glowing with warmth. Thomas, I love you more than words can express. Our life, everything we've built, makes me incredibly happy. Why are you asking? Is something bothering you? No, I quickly replied. I just needed to hear it. I can't imagine a greater happiness than what I feel with you. She smiled softly, a playful tone in her voice. Good answer. You're getting wiser every day. Then she leaned closer and whispered, Now enough talking. Kiss me. The next day, David told me he wanted a divorce from Patricia. It turned out she had been cheating on him for about 3 months, and he had no intention of forgiving her. She made her choice, and now she'd regret it. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. This was supposed to be our last summer at the cottage, just the two of us. We had made the decision to pass it on to the kids, who were eagerly awaiting the opportunity to keep it in the family. With each passing year, the trips here became more difficult for us. It was no longer the easy getaway it had been in our youth. We were preparing for a move, having sold our home. Everything from our house was packed and sent to storage. waiting for us in the gated community where we planned to move in November. The only things we brought with us to the cottage were our clothes. We had already sold our main car, leaving the old trailer by the lake for the kids to use when they visited. Our new home would be in a retirement community. Just a mile from the community gates was a small medical clinic, part of a larger medical center. Everything we needed, stores, shops, was within walking distance, and we'd get by just fine with golf carts for transportation. The weather there was perfect year-round, a pleasant change from the storms we had grown used to. This place seemed ideal for spending the rest of our lives. Patricia and I had lived a wonderful life together. She loved me, and I loved her deeply. Like any couple, we had our disagreements, but we always found a way to resolve them. She was an amazing life partner, though as we aged, intimacy became a rare occurrence. Still, we kissed, we hugged, and most of the time, that was enough. The hugs remained constant, and occasionally a spark of passion still flickered between us. Our children had grown into happy and successful adults, with wonderful partners and fulfilling lives. Patricia and I had 6 children, 11 grandchildren, and even 3 great-grandchildren. Our family was our greatest source of pride and joy. It was a beautiful evening in late August. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pink and golden hues. Crickets were just beginning their nightly serenade when Patricia turned to me and said, "I need to tell you something." I had been expecting this moment and was prepared for it. Our family was close, full of love and warmth, and I had thought I could keep my secrets forever. But I knew the time had come to reveal them to Patricia, especially since I suspected she had her own secrets. Well, most of them, at least. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I had anticipated this conversation before our move, though I thought it would happen a bit later. "I thought you'd wait until after the move to bring this up." "You knew this was coming?" she asked, surprised. "How could you know? I just made up my mind today after seeing you relax with that bottle of brandy." "Yes, dear," I replied with a smile. "I've noticed how tense you've been lately. And let's be honest, we both drank quite a bit today. But don't worry, I haven't turned into some old drunk. My mind is still clear. The brandy just helps ease the pain in my knees." "No, Charles, it's not about that," Patricia said, shaking her head. "I have something important I need to tell you." "Oh, let me guess," I joked. "You found my stash? It's been years since my wild youth, but sometimes I still indulge. At my age, I wouldn't be too embarrassed if someone called me an addict. I doubt I have decades left anyway." "Charles, don't say that," Patricia said, clearly upset. "You still have so much life ahead of you. Please don't throw it away." "All right, then what? You found my collection of movies? I thought you'd figure it out at some point. You're too smart for me to hide that forever." "Charles, that's disgusting," Patricia exclaimed, horrified. "I had no idea about that." "Oh," I said, stunned. "Well, then it must be something else." The room filled with heavy silence before she spoke again. "Darling, there's nothing you've hidden from me that I don't already know. I'm aware of everything. You did the DNA test, didn't you?" "Yes, but that was a long time ago," I replied. "It didn't change anything for me," I continued. "The moment she was born, I saw his face in her. She never looked like me. As I told you before, Patricia and I raised 6 children, and one of them, our youngest, wasn't biologically mine, although Patricia gave birth to her. When you insisted on naming her Carla, everything made sense. I realized that you and Carl Donaldson had deceived me. You named her after him. When they did her blood work shortly after she was born, I immediately knew she wasn't mine. As soon as it became possible to do a DNA test, I secretly took a strand of her hair and tested it. The results confirmed it. Carla was Donaldson's daughter, and you carried that secret your whole life. Oscar, I'm truly sorry. Carla isn't your daughter. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Our family was wonderful, and it didn't seem to affect how you treated me. I loved you, and your betrayal didn't disrupt our daily lives. I wanted our children to grow up feeling secure, knowing that we'd always be there for them. That's why I stayed silent about what I found out. That's not like you. I expected you to get revenge the moment you found out. I did get revenge, But since you both kept your relationship a secret, and it didn't affect my life, Ginny and I decided to keep our revenge hidden. It took you a while to grasp what I'm saying. Ginny, of course, was Carl's wife, and she had passed away several years before this conversation. She died the previous year. We had our moments of quiet revenge. While you were sneaking off to Carl, doing your intimate things with him in the back seat of his car or out in nature, Ginny and I were in our bed, making love and creating the children Carl thought were his. What? Yes, you see, Carl and Ginny couldn't have children. They spent years and a fortune on treatments because Carl was infertile. His sperm just couldn't do its job. However, you got lucky with a 1 in a million chance from one of his treatments. But here's the most interesting part. All 3 of Carl and Ginny's children are actually mine. Do they know? Yes. Before Ginny passed, she told them everything. In fact, each of them came to talk to me afterward. Carl raised them, and they'll always see him as their father, but they understand what Ginny did. Without her actions, they wouldn't exist. You really came out the winner, didn't you? She asked, bitterness in her voice. What are you getting at? When we got married, you always wanted a big family, but I only wanted 5 children. Yet you ended up with 9, didn't you? Actually, 12. Her eyes widened as it dawned on her that I hadn't stopped at Ginny Donaldson. The truth gradually sank in further. My nieces? She asked, finally putting all the pieces together. Patricia had always joked that her nieces looked as much like my family as they did her sisters. She earned her gold star. Yes, dear. Your sister saw you sneaking away with Roger that night during our group trip. She followed you to the beach, hiding behind a tree, watching as the 2 of you were on the lounger. She overheard your conversation about how thrilling it had been to sunbathe naked, knowing that everyone was watching. I overheard your plot about your Wednesday meetups when we returned from our trip. You signed up for dance lessons, and he, as if by chance, joined a bowling club. But once a month you skipped class to secretly escape to a roadside motel. The curtains in the room weren't fully closed, leaving just enough space for me to take several compromising photos. I saved them all on my laptop, and if you want, I can show them to you before bed. You might enjoy reminiscing about those moments. I have other photos, taken at different times. Take Patricia, for example. Her expression was priceless when she realized what was happening. But don't worry, I didn't seek revenge on any of them. Life took care of that itself. It seems your behavior somehow attracts misfortune. Remember Danny Dawson, the mailman? He got caught dealing illicit substances. The police stopped him after receiving a tip. I think he's still behind bars. And then there was the time you made a move on your boss. Someone told his wife about it. And as you know, she comes from a prominent family in our town. One Wednesday, she decided to follow him. She caught him, literally with his pants down, in the arms of his secretary. The divorce left him penniless, and after the scandal, no one wanted to hire him. If you didn't hear, he eventually drank himself to death. You, though, got off scot-free. You were his Tuesday fling, and his wife never found out about you. Don't worry, your secrets are safe with me. Oh, and remember that exterminator who died in his van? It was the same day he worked at our house. Instead of a tip, you decided to sleep with him. Somehow the fumes from his leaking chemical tanks filled the van, and he never made it out. At least his death was quick and painless. Then there was Jack Riles, little Oscar's teacher. Firefighters found him burned to death in bed. Apparently he fell asleep with a lit cigarette and never woke up. You knew about all of this, and yet you stayed with me. Why would I even consider divorcing you? To end up in some dingy apartment while you enjoy my house and salary? To see my kids only a couple of times a month? If I wanted to remarry, I'd have to work 2 jobs to support 2 households, depriving myself of any social life or hope for intimacy. You must be joking. Patricia, you've always been the perfect woman for me. You took excellent care of me, our children, and our home. Even with your part-time job, you earned more than people working full-time. You were and still are a rarity. I never even dreamed of letting you go. But I was unfaithful. I cheated. And you? You were something entirely different. A cheater with an insatiable thirst for more. So, I stopped playing by the rules too. I lost count of how many women I've been with. Tall, short, curvy, slim, blondes, brunettes, redheads, athletes, even celebrities. It was an exhilarating time. So don't feel like you owe me any confessions. I've never been honest either. We sat together for a long time, sipping brandy and watching the sun slowly disappear behind the horizon. Frogs and crickets filled the air with their night chorus, and for a brief moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. Eventually, Patricia got up and went to bed. I stayed outside, dozing off in the chair, with a slight smile on my face, content that she finally knew everything. The next morning, Patricia found me still in that rocking chair, my hand gripping a glass of brandy. The world around was quiet and peaceful, and my face was frozen in a calm, gentle smile. The night before had been filled with emotions. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks as she listened to him open up his soul to her. Yet by morning, a deep sense of calm had enveloped her. She had long realized that her desires extended far beyond what Oscar could ever give her. Although he was the most passionate lover in her life, her thirst for more surpassed what any single man could offer. There were always others, lurking in the shadows, ready to take advantage of her weaknesses. In a strange way, she felt relieved when she learned that Oscar had raised children who weren't his by blood. It seemed to her a kind of poetic justice. For years, she had suspected that the mysterious moments when their finances worsened, forcing them into brief periods of austerity, were not accidental. Most likely, during those times, he had quietly been helping her sister or Ginny Donaldson, ensuring the well-being of his other children. But despite everything, he had always treated their youngest daughter as if she were his own. Recalling the odd misfortunes that had befallen her former lovers, Patricia was suddenly gripped by a troubling thought. Perhaps these accidents weren't accidents at all. Oscar, in his silent way, might have been seeking revenge. Oddly enough, this realization brought her a sense of justice. Oscar wasn't the kind of man who would lose a woman without exacting some sort of price. It was remarkable how he managed to maintain balance in their lives, keeping their home a sacred sanctuary. Everything that happened outside of it remained foreign, until last night. He had always loved her. Oscar had loved her fully, all his life. This extraordinary, unforgettable man cherished her so deeply that he accepted her flaws and found the strength to endure them. He lived by rules that she constantly broke. And now, sitting next to him, holding his cold, lifeless hand for the last time, she felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her. Her eyes fell on the glass of brandy clutched in his hand, and she gently removed it. Patricia picked up the phone and called their eldest son, urgently asking him to come to the lake immediately. She told him that his father was gone. After that, she reached out to her niece and to Ellen Donaldson, Oscar and Ginny's eldest daughter. Once the calls were finished, she returned to Oscar and kissed him for the last time. "Thank you, my love," she whispered quietly. The world around her sank into a peaceful, tranquil silence. For 51 years, she had loved a man who endured her countless infidelities. Now, years of guilt and suffering awaited her. This was the end for her. She couldn't imagine how she could go on now that her Oscar was gone. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Hi, David. Is it okay if I call you that? The counselor asked softly, her voice calm and soothing. I nodded, indicating that it was fine with me. You can call me Elizabeth, or just Elle, she offered warmly, inviting me into her office. I know many people feel uncomfortable when they come here, so I try to avoid unnecessary formalities, she added, opening the door. Inside, Margaret, my wife, at least for now, was already waiting for me. As soon as I entered, she stood to greet me. Hello, David, she said quietly. You look well, she added, looking into my eyes intently. I glanced at her for a moment. You too, I replied, though it wasn't true. She stood there, unsure of what to do next, her gaze full of expectation. Elle observed her closely, trying to figure out what Margaret was waiting for. And then I noticed the longing in her eyes. It dawned on me what she needed. I opened my arms and she stepped forward, accepting the embrace. She was familiar, yet different. Thinner, changed since I left home 2 months ago, shortly before Valentine's Day. That day was when I found out she had been cheating on me for the past 5 years. Elle cleared her throat gently, prompting Margaret to reluctantly release me and return to her seat. Elle gestured for me to sit as well, arranging us so that we could face each other. "Let's start by clarifying why we're here," Elle began. "I'll start. My role is to guide this conversation so that each of you can take something valuable from it. After this, you will decide whether you want to continue together, separately, or perhaps pursue both paths. I'm not here to judge or assign blame," she explained, leaning forward slightly. "I may ask questions, but the true answers come from you both. I'm just here to help you find them." She leaned back in her chair and turned to me. "David, what brought you here? What do you want to achieve?" I had asked myself that question, and I decided to be honest. "I'm here because my wife agreed to the financial arrangement I proposed, but only on the condition that I attend this meeting," I said. After a pause, I added, "I also want to understand how I failed as a husband and what drove my wife to be with someone else." Elle nodded thoughtfully, jotting something down in her notebook. Then she looked at Margaret. "Margaret," she gently prompted. Margaret wiped away the tears that had already formed in her eyes. "I'm here to let my husband know that none of this is his fault. These are my mistakes. It doesn't matter what I want now because it's already too late." Elle frowned slightly but didn't comment right away, scribbling something else before glancing back at Margaret. "As I understand, your husband initiated the divorce, and yet you're saying that you believe it's entirely your fault. Can you explain more about how it got to this point?" Margaret hesitated, glancing at me before beginning. To her credit, she didn't hide anything. She told Elle everything. 5 years ago, at an annual real estate management conference, her specialization was university property, Margaret reconnected with an old college friend. That evening, they reminisced, and later that night, their old relationship reignited. If it had been a one-time thing, I might never have found out. But it happened again at the next 2 conferences, and it would have happened again this year if I hadn't discovered it. A waitress at a restaurant, while I was ordering roses to send to Margaret for Valentine's Day, casually mentioned her affair. When I confronted Margaret the day before she was set to leave for another conference, she confessed everything. She said it was supposed to be the last time, as her lover's wife was pregnant, and we had been planning to start a family ourselves. In the end, 5 lives were shattered over a few stolen moments of memories. When Margaret finished her confession, there was a long silence as we waited for Elle to finish writing her notes. Margaret looked at me, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. I was sorry too. Once I had believed we had something special. Elle paused for a moment, then quietly asked, "Margaret, can you explain how meeting an old friend led to you sleeping with him?" My wife cast a troubled glance at me. Choosing her words carefully, she cautiously replied, likely considering my feelings. "There was a sort of personal inertia that created a certain reaction between us. Alcohol acted as a catalyst, lowering the barrier to crossing that line." Elle looked at me, as if checking whether I was as puzzled by Margaret's explanation as she was. I took a moment to process what I'd heard, then nodded in understanding. "That's an interesting metaphor," I said. However, Elle wasn't satisfied with the answer and decided to press further. "Sorry for being direct," she interrupted, "but can you say that more plainly?" Margaret turned to me for support, but I shook my head. "No," I said. "This is your analogy. You need to explain it." With a heavy sigh, Margaret continued. "Michael and I were part of the same group of friends for over 2 years. Often, especially on weekends, we ended up alone. We spent time together. A few times it ended with us sleeping together. We didn't have a serious relationship," she explained. "In fact, we weren't really a couple, so there was no formal breakup. Whatever it was," she trailed off, a sad smile forming on her lips. "It never really had a proper end." "We just gradually drifted apart," Margaret added, wiping away a tear. Her voice grew more resolute as she went on. "I'm not trying to justify my actions. It was wrong, but that inertia still existed. When Michael and I were alone, away from home, like during our college days, we slipped back into old habits. She started twisting the rings on her fingers, a gesture I'd seen before when we first discussed this. I remembered how I had taken off my own ring back then, stunned by her betrayal. I wondered if she had noticed it at the time. As for what happened, Margaret said, let me explain it this way. Imagine a scenario with Alice and Bob. I almost smiled, realizing she had actually listened when I explained quantum cryptography to her. Alice and Bob were names we often used for imaginary people when discussing secure communication. Seeing my reaction, Margaret gave a crooked smile. Yes, I was listening, she admitted. Then, turning to Ella, she continued. Imagine that Alice had a major argument with her partner, Bob. Or maybe Bob was selfish or bad in bed. Whatever the reason, she decides to cheat on him. She buys new lingerie, goes out looking for attention, and makes it clear she's available. Margaret paused. That takes planning, effort, and there's a risk involved. At any moment, Alice could stop and think, is this worth it? But I wasn't like Alice. I had no desire to seek someone out. David and I were happy together, and that's where alcohol comes into play. With a deep sigh, she continued, visibly upset. There was already something between Michael and me in the past. There was no temptation, no big decision to go further. It just happened. The emotional boundary between us had been crossed long ago, she said with heavy regret in her voice. Alcohol simply made it easier to ignore that boundary. It was like a spark that set everything in motion. Elle interjected. Like activation energy, right? Margaret nodded. Exactly. Some reactions need a lot of energy to start, but if there's a gas leak, even a small spark can cause an explosion that destroys the entire house. That's what happened between us after that night in the bar. Under the influence of alcohol, your previous connection with a college friend was so emotionally superficial that you simply reverted to old patterns of behavior, almost without any emotional involvement, Elle noted. Yes, Margaret replied. The situation was familiar, and we acted the way we always had, without thinking about the consequences. That's why it affected me, but not David. She turned to me. That's why I asked you to come today, she continued. I wanted you to understand that my actions were solely my responsibility, not yours. Elle added, but you moved on with your life. Yes, my wife admitted. Not right after the first time, but after we parted on the second night. And then, a year later, it happened again. We met, and I spent the night with Michael because I could. It became a habit. Every time our paths crossed, it felt like our directions changed, she explained, watching me closely, trying to gauge whether I was following her line of thought. I've thought about it a lot, she added, and tried to explain what happened without getting overly emotional. I listened carefully. When you and Michael reconnected, both of you had your own lives, but your shared past seemed to shift you onto a different path. Like Newton's second law, I asked. Exactly. And after that, every time you met, you continued down this new path. Yes, she responded with a deep sigh. Last year we shared a room. This year we planned to spend another night together, but agreed it would be the last time. Elle asked, weren't you afraid of pregnancy or diseases? No, Margaret answered confidently. I was on birth control and we used protection. I'm not a moralist, Elle admitted, but even I wouldn't return to my husband after being with another man. I asked, did you ever wonder why he had contraceptives with him? No, Margaret admitted. It was just luck, she added bitterly. If Michael hadn't had them, we wouldn't have been intimate. I assumed they were in his bag when he was with Jenna, I said. Jenna checked his luggage when I called her, just like I went through yours. She found a box of 12 condoms in his laundry bag. Margaret lowered her gaze, embarrassed. I'm not finished, I said. There was a receipt in the box, dated January of this year, I continued, and there were 8 left. Margaret immediately understood, her face expressing sadness. So I'm not just a cheater, but a fool, she muttered, leaning back in her chair and staring at the ceiling. I tried to comprehend how she could so easily sleep with another man. Was it simply a convenient excuse? I wanted to understand, though I knew any explanation would sound like self-justification. Her regret was clear, but she didn't try to hide her guilt. Using Newton's laws as a metaphor was clever, but unfortunately, the third law mattered too. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, I said. Margaret's connection with Michael had caused a distancing in our relationship. Elle turned to me and asked, "David, do you believe Margaret is telling the truth?" I replied that I did. Elle continued, "I'm not asking you to forgive her actions, but do you see the difference between a partner seeking new intimate experiences and two people continuing an old, unresolved connection?" I needed time to think. "Let me rephrase," Elle said. "Is there anything in Margaret's words that makes you think your role as her husband could have influenced her choices?" Both women remained silent as I pondered the question. On that decisive day, I went through the suitcase she had packed for the conference. Inside, I found her everyday clothes and underwear, nothing unusual, nothing she wouldn't normally wear around me. She hadn't packed anything special for Michael. Moreover, the delicate lingerie in her drawer remained untouched. Whatever their affair was, it didn't seem like a passionate, fiery romance, but rather something insignificant and uninspired. As the conference approached, our intimacy remained unchanged. There were no noticeable shifts in our sex life, and my wife seemed content with the state of our relationship. Occasionally, she hinted that she was open to trying something new if I wanted, but she never pushed it. We both cared about each other's pleasure, and there wasn't a sense that either of us was hiding anything. I looked up. "No," I answered Ella's question. "I believe Margaret acted on her own, without direct connection to me." Elle reminded me of our earlier conversations, pointing out that I once said I wanted to understand how I had failed as a husband. She let that thought linger in the air before asking, "Do you still feel that way?" I shook my head. The situation arose from events beyond my control. Margaret should have seen the warning signs and avoided the path she chose, but she didn't. It wasn't my fault. No. I couldn't have changed anything. Not knowing what was happening between them, I admitted. Then Ella turned to my wife. "Margaret, you mentioned that you wanted to show your husband that his mistakes weren't the reason you drifted apart. Hearing his response, do you feel you've succeeded in doing that?" "Yes," she whispered quietly. Elle returned to her notes. "You also said that what you wanted wasn't anything significant. Can you explain why you feel that way?" Margaret's eyes met mine, filled with sadness. "Because my husband is a man of logic, and he respects the opinions of those he admires. There's one person whose advice is particularly important here." She shifted her gaze to Elle, addressing her directly. "I want my husband to take me back. But despite my deep desire for that, there's someone he greatly admires, Albert Einstein, and he effectively advised him not to." Elle looked puzzled, but I understood her reasoning. Margaret dabbed her nose with a tissue, her eyes welling up, and explained to the counselor. Although some doubt that Einstein actually said it, he is often credited with the idea that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. She shrugged with a hint of resignation. With such advice from someone David truly respects, why would he even consider giving me another chance? The session ended there, but as we said our goodbyes, I only said, "Margaret, I regret wasting 23 years of my life on you. You're not worthy of me. As per the agreement, you'll get 15% of everything we have after the divorce. Goodbye." This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The disappearance of my wife in the midst of the lively atmosphere of the party struck me as extremely strange, especially considering that my grandfather's enormous house was full of rooms. Nevertheless, I continued searching for her, opening one door after another, as if she had simply dissolved into the stuffy, thick air of the place. I couldn't shake the hope that she hadn't gotten lost or felt overwhelmed by the unfamiliar setting of the house. It was her first time attending such a family gathering, and I silently prayed that nothing would go wrong. I opened yet another door, not really expecting much at this point, as it seemed like my 10th attempt. But when I opened this final door, I found something completely unexpected. That day, my wife and I were supposed to celebrate my grandfather's 80th birthday under a clear sky and in warm weather. We were well aware that my grandfather, known for his boundless energy and youthful spirit, would try to make this day unforgettable. He had such a passion for life that a few years ago, he even skipped our wedding, choosing instead to go on a trip with his friends. This time he was determined to make amends and finally meet my wife. I had warned her in advance that my grandfather was nothing like ordinary grandparents. He was a free spirit, always seeking new adventures and never aging in soul. On the way to the party, I mentioned that many of the guests would likely be younger than us, people he had met when they were teenagers. I even joked that we might encounter his significantly younger companion, who would probably be wearing something far too revealing. When we arrived at the grand hall, my grandfather's booming laughter filled the space, spreading joy throughout the room. His energy seemed to light up the place, drawing everyone's attention. He greeted us with a wide smile and a mischievous sparkle in his eyes, clearly delighted by our arrival. I could never fully tell how genuine his smile was, as he had a habit of suddenly shifting from cheerfulness to quiet mumbling. Nevertheless, I hugged him tightly, feeling somewhat unsure but trying to show my feelings. My wife was immediately charmed by his charisma when they exchanged greetings. He had a knack for instantly easing any tension with his presence, and she quickly fell under his spell. It seemed like he had a natural ability to connect with people effortlessly. I watched as her admiration grew, as if she were drawn into his orbit. She was amazed by how easily he could relate to both the young and the old. Grandfather was a master of communication through his eccentric humor and wit, effortlessly breaking down any barriers. His love for life was undeniable, and his positive energy was contagious. My wife seemed almost hypnotized by him, realizing that age didn't matter and that the secret to eternal youth was in one's mindset. Yet, I couldn't shake the growing unease as I observed her becoming more and more influenced by him. As the evening progressed, her fascination with my grandfather became increasingly troubling. I quietly suggested she tone down her enthusiasm a bit, but she was captivated by his charm. She even teased me, accusing me of lacking his spontaneity and childlike zest. I realized it was time to set some boundaries, gently reminding her that despite his youthful spirit, he was still my grandfather. The party was in full swing, with lively music playing and couples swirling and dancing around the room. Suddenly, my wife turned to my grandfather and invited him to dance. I thought it was just a harmless gesture, something fun between family members. At first, they simply enjoyed the music and the moment, but gradually their interaction started to take on an inappropriate tone. What began as innocent fun turned into something unsettling. Their connection on the dance floor developed a vibe that didn't seem fitting, given their relationship. They continued dancing, fully absorbed in each other and the rhythm of the music, as if unaware that they had crossed a certain boundary. I stood on the sidelines, feeling a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and anxiety. I was torn between wanting to intervene and not wanting to make a scene, desperately searching for a way to stop them without escalating the situation. My mind was swirling with emotions. Gathering all my courage, I quietly approached them just as the music began to fade. I waited for the melody to end before gently placing my hand on my grandfather's shoulder. Leaning in, I suggested we take a break from dancing and join the other guests for some conversation. Sensing my unease, both my wife and grandfather agreed, oblivious to the reactions their dancing had caused among those around us. We moved to a more private spot, away from prying eyes, to talk about the importance of setting boundaries and considering others' feelings. When my wife opened her mouth to say something, I interrupted her, feeling there was more I needed to express. As she turned to leave, I grabbed her hand, looking directly into her eyes, and warned her that if she crossed my boundaries again, tonight or any other night, she wouldn't be coming home with me. She objected, saying that my actions were hurting her, but in my anger I couldn't control my emotions. I pushed her away and left, fearing that if I stayed, I might do something even worse. Leaving her standing in the hallway, I quickly walked away. Guilt washed over me, but instead of facing her, I decided to drown my anxiety with a few drinks. Immersed in the energy of the party, I felt the alcohol dulling my emotions. Though the room was filled with laughter and celebration, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety gnawing at me from the inside. My thoughts kept returning to my wife as I slammed my glass down on the bar. Suddenly, I realized she had been gone for a long time. Panic gripped me as I scanned the room, searching for her in the crowd. The guilt I had suppressed earlier resurfaced, now mixed with fear. I pushed through the crowd, shouting her name, but there was no response. I searched frantically, but the once lively rooms now seemed eerily quiet. With every passing second, my fear grew stronger. Time seemed to slow, each minute feeling like an eternity as regrets and doubts swirled in my mind. How had I let myself lose control so completely? I berated myself for failing her as a partner, the weight of shame hanging over me like a suffocating fog. Bitterness boiled within me, her refusal still fresh in my memory. I grew tired of opening door after door, only to be met with disappointment. Yet I stood before another door, unsure if I could bear what lay behind it. A sense of hopelessness weighed me down, but a faint flicker of determination remained, urging me to try once more. I opened the door, bracing myself for yet another painful discovery. What I saw on the other side of the door exceeded my worst fears. To my horror, I found my wife tied up on the bed, and in the corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was my grandfather. I was utterly unprepared for such a shocking sight. I had always known about his issues with younger women, but seeing him there with my wife was beyond comprehension. The fact that she seemed to want it destroyed me. A torrent of emotions, shame, disgust, betrayal, overwhelmed me. I felt betrayed not just by her, but by him as well. The scene was repulsive. Staring at them in disbelief, I felt like they were looking at me as if I had disturbed their peace. I wanted to strike out, to make them feel the pain they were causing me, but I held back, realizing that if they had any shred of conscience, they wouldn't have gone this far. All I could manage to say was a shocked, "What the hell?" in an attempt to understand how my wife could go along with this, as if trying to convince me that it wasn't her choice. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I was seeing. My grandfather was still hovering over my wife, looking lost, his eyes vacant. Not a word escaped his lips during those agonizing moments. Finally, gathering my strength, I asked him, "Do you have anything to say?" His hand clutched his chest, his face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. I stood firm, leaning on my hip, and said, "Now's your chance to play the greatest role of your life." I was unmoved by his remorse for what he had done with my wife. After a brief pause, he collapsed onto her. At first, I thought he was pretending again, as he often did. But when my wife, having lost all dignity, screamed for him to get off her because she could no longer bear his weight, I realized that this time, he wasn't faking it. After betraying me with my own grandfather, my wife had the nerve to look at me as if expecting help. I had always known that I wouldn't grieve my grandfather's death, but I hadn't anticipated feeling relieved. I approached, checked his pulse, and coldly said, "He's dead," then turned away. She called after me, asking where I was going, leaving her there. I replied that I was leaving behind both my grandfather and his final disgrace. Flinging the door open wide, I saw guests scattered around the house enjoying the festivities. I shouted, "Come and see what Grandpa was up to in his final moments." I stepped aside, leaning against the wall as she began to wail. Her horror grew as she realized she had let him tie her down out of sheer greed. My words drew the crowd, and the guests rushed into the room, drawn by her cries. When they entered, she completely broke down, cursing me and everyone around her, begging to be untied. Even in death, my grandfather seemed alive in his final scandal, as his guests began documenting the scene. The spectacle of an 80-year-old man dying in the arms of his grandson's wife was too shocking not to capture. Within minutes, my wife's disgrace had spread across the internet, and it was not something she could easily come to terms with. She tried to hide her face, but it was already too late. The guests, at first shocked to witness such a moment, started taking pictures and sharing them. Laughter soon filled the room as they began mocking the absurdity of the situation. I clapped my hands to get their attention and thanked them for being witnesses to this show. Satisfied with the public humiliation of my wife, I decided the show was over and asked everyone to leave. As they left the house, I looked at her and said, "Not a bad performance, wouldn't you say?" Then I left her there, sobbing next to my grandfather's lifeless body, still calling out to me for help. As I left the family estate, I felt the weight of despair hanging over me like a storm. It wasn't just the crumbling walls or the fading memories that weighed on me, but the agonizing reality that the two people closest to me, my wife and my grandfather, had betrayed me. As I stepped outside, I felt a surge of anger rise within me, fueled by their betrayal. I couldn't comprehend how they could do this to me. I was overwhelmed by how they had managed to orchestrate their treacherous betrayal right under my nose. The all-consuming sense of deception and the exposure of their lies before my very eyes only fueled my rage. But as I moved farther away from the estate, a strange sense of clarity began to pierce through the clouds of anger in my mind. I began to see the intricate web they had woven, carefully planning their betrayal right in the middle of a celebration that was meant to be ours. It had all been premeditated. The signs had always been there, but I was too caught up in my own happiness to notice them. In the ensuing silence, I shut myself off, ignoring the questions of those around me. Lost in my thoughts for days, I tried to come to terms with the shattered remnants of my trust. Then came the news of the funeral. The death of a close relative pulled me back into the family, forcing me to confront the chaos of grief and the rage bubbling inside me. At first, I resisted the idea of attending. Why should I honor someone who had so cruelly betrayed me? But beneath the pain remained a small part of me yearning for closure, a desire to free myself from the chains of bitterness and anger. I craved closure, the kind that only comes when you face harsh truths head-on. In the end, I decided to attend the funeral, even though the weight of my grief seemed to obstruct every step. It wasn't about forgiveness or sudden enlightenment. Rather, I was driven by the need to reclaim my strength and regain control over my emotions, which pushed me to take action. As I stood before the casket, my initial feelings of rage and helplessness slowly gave way to a deep sadness, interwoven with a new sense of determination. When it was time to deliver the eulogy, I spoke from the heart, allowing my words to reflect the truth of my experience. I made a conscious choice to let go of the betrayal that had burdened me for so long, and in that decision, I took the first step toward healing. As I left the funeral hall, I felt a small spark of hope, a feeling that had been foreign to me for quite some time. Though I knew my journey to recovery had only just begun, I had made an important step forward. Leaving behind the pain and lies, I made a firm promise to myself to rebuild my life with newfound strength, with perseverance in my heart, and renewed faith in my own worth. The divorce was swift, and she was left with nothing, as outlined in our prenuptial agreement. There was no need for evidence of her infidelity. Everyone knew what she had done to me. Now, her life in this town will not be easy. She has disgraced herself, lost her dignity, and forfeited the respect of others. I regret having spent 7 years of my life on a woman who so easily gave herself to a wealthy older man the day they met. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.